Oh, the ROG Ally's SD card doesn't work, so that means that the Steam Deck is better because the Steam Deck's SD card worked from—
Shut up!
What is going on, everybody? So there has been a lot of news about the ROG Ally and ASUS's response about the BIOS and performance regression. But most of all, there has been a ton of negativity towards ASUS and the ROG Ally. And it feels like some of the criticism and negativity are somewhat justified, but most of it, in my opinion, is way too early for this kind of hostility towards the ROG Ally. And the main reason I say that is because when the Steam Deck first came out in the first few months of its testing and release, it was called unfinished, similar to the ROG Ally. There were some SD card issues. A lot of people were having trouble with SD cards being detected on the Steam Deck. The OS would freeze up every time you did one thing or another. And for myself, I actually had to reset the entire Steam Deck on the first week. Now, comparing this to the ROG Ally and, if I may, its allegations. Now, there's no hard evidence that the SD cards getting quote-unquote baked are due to overheating from the actual system itself. There's been a lot of proof to oppose these allegations, stating that it's the firmware and not heat dissipation or anything related to the heat sink, air vents, or the temperature of the SD card slot itself. Now, this is very strange because the Steam Deck had legitimate issues in the first month alone, but there weren't a lot of people saying straight up lies or assuming one thing over another because most people just didn't understand Linux. But I feel like with Windows, there's straight up people that just do not know what they're talking about. And with the ASUS debacle in the last few years with their customer service and all that, I feel like that's enabling people to project what they already know about the company and what they've done and all of their dislikes towards ASUS. Now, I don't think just straight away returning your ASUS ROG Ally is a smart thing to do, especially since we're in the first 2 weeks. I feel like the only thing that this is showing is how the vast majority of consumers are extremely impatient when it comes to experimental hardware. But even with a fraction of the shipment that ROG Ally is currently dealing with, the Steam Deck still had legitimate firmware and OS issues. There were some people that were dealing with input latency, driver issues, SD card issues, display issues, game scope, desktop, you name it. Every type of issue was there, and Valve was dealing with it. Now, ASUS is trying to deal with this, but it is in a much larger scope than the Steam Deck will ever see. ASUS is a global company, so they're shipping this around the world, and that's why it seems like there are a lot more issues with this, because it's nowhere near as niche as the Aya Neo and the One X player. It's a product that's sold in actual stores. They would probably be going through either the same thing or so much worse. I think when it comes to any company that's going global, like ASUS, it's difficult to maintain and divide your attention, and ASUS focuses on more than handhelds. They focus on phones, monitors, computer parts. And yes, their main focus is gaming PCs. But that's not to say that they shouldn't have any issues or be imperfect in any way. PC gaming in general is a risk, especially for the buyer. When you're getting a motherboard or a graphics card, you're most likely going to have issues with one or the other. It's a guaranteed thing. Gaming PCs are extremely risky, and even the Steam Deck has seen some dark days. But the only reason why a lot of people weren't as hard on Valve is because their lowest price was $400. If the ASUS ROG Ally had a base price similar to that, then yeah, people would probably be a lot more forgiving. But here's the thing, they're only selling the PC. They're not getting any kind of extra money from anything else. Maybe Xbox Game Pass, but that's still a gamble for them. I think the $700 price tag is well worth it because you can get any third-party game you want. It's highly customizable with Windows 11, and you can pretty much play anything you want. The sky's the limit when it comes to Windows PCs. With Linux, it is simplified, but it's also still complicated. And I really believe the main reason why Valve chose Linux to be their main operating system is mostly because it guaranteed them money. And even then, they said the $400 price tag was painful for them. It was painful because they had to have faith that it would work out. And the only way to make a guaranteed profit from the Steam Deck is to make using third-party applications as difficult as humanly possible. And what's the most difficult OS to use third-party applications on? Well, Linux. Sure, you can just use Proton, but there are still a lot of third-party applications that I'm having difficulty playing and starting. Operating third-party apps on Linux is not for the faint of heart. It's something you need to put hours, days, and months in. And even then, Proton could just update or something can change and it won't be the same. And I think when it comes to freedom, that's all gaming PCs are about. So you can have total freedom. That's why the parts are so expensive. That's why the actual handheld, is more expensive than the Steam Deck, and not by much. The ROG Ally is only $50 more than the top tier Steam Deck. And given all of the freedom that you have with it, that's a freaking miracle. You can do anything on it. Not just the stuff that Valve tells you can play. Hey, this one's verified, you play it. Still doesn't work. There's still games that stutter to death and they're verified. Valve just wants to highlight which games they see as mainstream enough and have a deal with so you can buy. You're being played by Linux and Valve for the most part, and people are okay with that because you have this nice fancy gaming mode. I think that's such a, how do I say this without sounding like an elitist? Oh yeah, sheep way of thinking. Just because somebody's hurting you a certain way means that it's better. Just because it's easier doesn't mean that it's better. You have less freedom with the Steam Deck. Hell, there's like about 5,000 more games you can play in the ROG Ally. I think that's worth it. I think having complete and utter freedom opposed to being locked down on the Steam Deck in order to get the best performance on it, because if you install Windows on the Steam Deck, you're not going to get that great of performance on the thing. There is a lot to lose when going outside of the perimeters that Valve set for you. But when you don't have those limitations, there's so much that can go wrong. The firmware and everything else. Some people say that the Ioneo craps out on them after a few months. That doesn't mean that the system is terrible. But what I'm trying to say, if there's any point to what I'm saying, is this is just the beginning. Of course it's going to be rough, but I think in terms of software and playability, the ROG Ally is a lot more smooth than the Steam Deck was in the first few months. Just because there are much more customers for the ROG Ally and it's just exposed. And yeah, there are a lot of people that are saying negative things about it. It doesn't mean that it's any better or worse than the Steam Deck was. I think Asus is dealing with this the best way you can when it comes to millions of people that are asking questions. They're still looking into it. And yes, when it comes to huge products out there, like electric skateboards, scooters, PCs, vacuums, there are a certain percentage that do not meet the advertised expectations. They're literally the embodiment of false advertisement. And that only happens because a company sometimes isn't humanly capable of checking every single individual unit. But if you're selling a few every month like Valve was, and it seemed like they were doing that purposefully, I think that would have been smart for Asus to do with the ROG Ally, but it would have kind of not gotten them the recognition they wanted in the first place. Let's face it, if it wasn't global, it wouldn't be as popular as it is right now. But there is a double-edged sword to being popular. You're almost just as equally hated. So if you're thinking about returning your ROG Ally, think again, because the Steam Deck was just as bad when it first came out. And these issues will be mitigated and fixed because Asus has every intention to take accountability for their actions. At a time like this, that's the most important thing they can do. It would literally be business suicide if they don't try to fix these small issues that people are dealing with. And I do think the SD card and the performance isn't as terrible as people are making it out to be, but I get why they would worry so much. You did spend a lot of money on this device, and Asus currently doesn't have the best reputation. But here's the thing, when you're giving something a chance that doesn't have a great reputation, you have to go in with enough patience to justify that action. If you don't have enough patience, you're not giving something a chance, but you buy a product that's $700, that's kind of on you, isn't it? I'm going into the ROG Ally with realistic expectations and a whole lot of patience, and I'm having a great time with it. You just have to manage why you buy something. It's because you're hyped and somebody else is hyped. I was mainly hyped for this device because I realistically knew what it could be, not because I thought it was going to be that when it first came out. And I made this point clear over and over again. I feel like the minority that bought this device thought it was just going to be this saving grace and automatically better than the Steam Deck. It took a year and change for the Steam Deck to be as good as it is now. So if you're going into the Ally thinking that it's going to be as good as something that took a company like Valve a year and change to perfect or even be good enough, then those aren't realistic expectations at all. And this isn't a problem with Asus, this is a problem with consumers in general and expectation. I think if you have a Steam Deck and an ROG Ally, if the ROG Ally didn't work, okay, you can just play your Steam Deck all as well. That's how I think. If my ROG Ally messes up, I still have my Steam Deck to play. It's all good. You should always have a backup plan. But again, $700 is a lot of money. So I think it just needs a little more patience than what you give something that's been produced for 10 plus years like a gaming laptop was. It's just going to take a little more time than people initially thought, like say a year, to get all of the quirks right. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a realistic thing. Asus can fix all of these issues in time, like everything else. The Steam Deck in the first first 3 months didn't fix most issues. The community had to figure out a lot of these solutions for these issues themselves. That doesn't make the Steam Deck any less of a great product. It doesn't make ROG Ally any less of a great product. Yes, Asus is a bigger company in a way, but they're shipping and selling so many more Allies than Steam Decks that Valve sold. So for those bigger channels that are saying you should return it or giving the false message that you should return it, I say don't listen to those people. There's issues that happens with everything, and those issues are going to occur more frequently if there's a lot more units out there. But yeah, I do genuinely feel bad for people that are going through this with their ROG Ally. Don't misconstrue what I say as heartless or anything like that. That was more towards the people that are just hating on the ROG Ally and the Steam Deck stands that are just saying, oh, the ROG Ally has flaws. Well, the Steam Deck has no flaws. Therefore, the Steam Deck is better. Like that channel Fan the Deck. It's just annoying the shit out of me. Makes no sense why you would just point out something's flaws the first 2 weeks when it comes out, when the Steam Deck was a lot worse in the first 2 weeks. And if Valve sold the same amount of Steam Decks that Asus is selling with the Ally, there would be a whole lot more problems. In fact, the quality of the Steam Deck would go way down. But because they handled it like Nintendo does with their systems and only ships out like 300 to each state or something like that, the quality is a lot better from day one, but Steam Deck still had issues. When the ROG Ally fully works as intended, like mine does, I think it's better than the Steam Deck. I think it could do a lot more and it could play things a lot better. Or they're picking on the battery life, which makes absolutely no sense because a lot of people were saying the same thing about Steam Deck, showing pictures on Reddit of people carrying entire power banks on their back to power their Steam Deck with the caption, now it can play the Steam Deck for 20 hours. There was the same amount of jokes about the Steam Deck, but the point of people making jokes about the battery life is just them trying to say maybe Asus should have added a little more battery and made the Asus ROG Ally slightly heavier for that extra bit of playtime. I do admit, yeah, if the ROG Ally was a little heavier and it had a bigger battery, it probably wouldn't be getting these jokes. But realistically, with money, they wouldn't be able to sell it for $700 if they had a bigger battery in there. And if they were trying something a little more experimental with small things like 1X player, yeah, that works. But with global devices like the ROG Ally, if they sold a better or bigger battery, we most likely would have been seeing a Samsung Galaxy Note 7 situation, and that would have been an actual disaster. So yeah, give the ROG Ally a little more time to cook in your hands because the Steam Deck was doing the same thing. It was half-baked when it came out. There were a ton of issues and it was janky. And honestly, I think it was a lot more janky than the ROG Ally was for me. But yeah, let me know what you think about this whole situation. Are people just blowing this way out of proportion to the definition of the expression? Or are you a Steam Deck cultist and think the ROG Ally is going to fail because it had a few things wrong with it? You hate Asus because you like hating things. That's an unrealistic way to think. And just because a company has done a few wrongs doesn't mean they haven't done 1,000 rights. I think they should be rewarded and people should have faith because of what they used to be. If for the majority, they were a good thing. And I think for the majority, Asus was a good company. And even recently with their monitors, I think their monitors are killer. I recently dropped my portable monitor because I'm dumb and nothing broke. It was absolutely perfect. And it fell like about 10 feet. I think their monitors are glorious and they just made that one about a year and a half ago. I've mentioned this monitor a couple times. It's the white portable monitor that I use with my Steam Deck and ROG Ally. I straight up dropped it and it still works. So I think they make high quality monitors at the very least. So when I heard that the ROG Ally was coming with a 1080p 120 hertz screen, I couldn't wait because I love their monitors. And yeah, it's incredible. So yeah, again, let me know what you think and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.